Welcome to the Lead to Succeed podcast, a podcast where you hear firsthand leadership stories, tips, and hacks to enhance your life and career. Brought to you by Zahi and Osama and Musa. So welcome to Lead to the Succeed podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a hot topic in the leadership area, which is psychological safety. We're going to dig deep into this. Of course, with me, Osama and Musa, my co-host, and our guest, Stephan Wiedner. Stephan, where are you calling us from?
I'm located in Western Canada near the city of Vancouver, Zahi.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we'll get to know a little bit more about Stephan in a minute. My first question to you is, what's keeping you busy nowadays? And tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I mean, obviously, work is a big influence for me. It's how I spend the bulk of my day. But maybe to start off, I'll share a little bit about where I am personally. So I've got a couple teenage kids, and my son is just about to set off, spread his wings, flee our little nest, and go off to university in September. So we've been supporting him with writing essays and applying for schools, and just in general dealing with a teenager who's, wants to do things independently, but also still needs a little bit of our help. And our daughter, meanwhile, is patiently observing and watching her older brother struggle through all this sort of stuff. And I know in the back of her mind, she's thinking, I'm going to do a much better job when it's my turn. So I guess I'm dealing as a parent and all the while trying to stay healthy and exercise and get outside and play because that's what life's all about. Yeah, I'd love to work and have a big impact, but at the same time, want to make sure that I have time for family and some play.
Awesome. How about work? Tell us a little bit about your background and what do you do and what interests you about psychological safety and how did it all start?
Yeah, so about 15 years ago, I started up Numi.com. So Numi is a network of thousands of coaches all over the world. And in so doing, we eventually started doing quite a bit of corporate work. So corporations would come to us saying, wow, you have all these coaches. Can you align some coaches with some of our leaders? And so we started managing a bunch of one-on-one coaching engagements. And what I was really striving toward was being as much data-driven as possible. So I recognize that organizations, when they're spending money on coaching, especially one-on-one coaching, because it can be quite cost-effective. I know both of you are coaches. It can be cost prohibitive for some companies, as you both appreciate as coaches that you want to be able to demonstrate as much value as possible. And when I found out about the concept of psychological safety, I really was drawn to it for the reason that it's measurable. It is a objectively measurable factor within a team. And we also know that it's highly linked with outcomes and performance. So the best teams have the highest degree of psychological safety and the worst teams have the lowest degree of psychological safety. So for me, it felt like the perfect thing to be measuring when working with an individual who's receiving coaching, because even if it wasn't outwardly stated, every individual that was going through coaching was pretty much trying to become a better leader and be a better team leader and generate psychological safety within their team. Maybe you experienced that yourselves, where the leader wants to, increase their executive presence, or they want to be able to deal with conflict better, or they want to make sure that they can delegate and grow their own people with more of a coach approach, that kind of thing. Like, these are all the stated goals for all of the coaching engagements. And I thought, gosh, if in all of them, if we could increase psychological safety, I think that would be a win. And so that was my initial interest and foray into the topic of psychological safety.
Nice. I know Osama is eager to ask a question, but before we dig deeper into this topic, how would you define psychological safety?
Yeah, so I'll give you two definitions. The first is by Amy Edmondson, who's a Harvard professor. You likely know her name, and for those who don't, her research goes back to about 1998 or so. So she's been studying psychological safety for about 2.5 decades. And her definition is that psychological safety is a belief that within your work environment, you can speak up, you can say what's on your mind, you can even admit mistakes, and you do all of that without the fear of reprimand, so that without the fear of some sort of negative social consequence. And our working definition that we use in our training is it is the courage to speak up and the confidence to know you'll be heard. So as a manager or as a leader, you're trying to create an environment where people have the courage to speak up and the confidence to know they'll be heard. Now, I'd like to add a little bit about that definition there. That the first half, as you might appreciate, the courage to speak up is really important. And it's not the whole picture, right? Because there are protesters who are holding up their signs saying, whatever it is that they're fighting for. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're feeling heard or appreciated and understood. And so that's what we're striving for, is not just the speak up part, but for someone to be able to speak up, knowing that there's time and opportunity for them to be heard and understood. Make sense, guys?
Perfect.
Yeah, it makes a great deal of sense. And as Zahi said, I'm really eager to dig deeper into this topic. And, there is much of debate around the impact of the culture, and is it for every culture, is it for every society, or how to think of that aspect. And here the question is, Stephan, is around from what what is if there is any, what is the eligibility for for the organization to start asking its leaders about enhancing the psychological safety? If it goes this way, I would love to hear from you. Or is it for any organization to start encouraging leaders and the teams to enhance the psychological safety of the employees?
Well, I hold a fairly strong bias there, and I think, yes, absolutely, it's for every organization to at least start thinking about it. This needs to be on your radar, because every organization is wanting high performance. And if psychological safety is a key ingredient for high performance, they should at least be thinking about it. Now, is it universally valuable in all situations? I don't know if that's entirely accurate and true. What we know is that psychological safety is highly linked to high performance because it's highly linked to how groups of individuals learn. And so 100 years ago, when there was far less technology than there is today, when there was far less global business than there is today, and the complexity of the problems and challenges that businesses were facing, perhaps psychological safety 100 years ago wasn't really all that necessary. And whereas today, because the complexity of our work environment is so extreme, psychological safety is far more important today than it ever has been. And so, is every work environment one that requires maximum amount of learning and adaptability? It's pretty hard to find an industry that hasn't been disrupted by technology. And yet there are likely pockets, there are likely businesses or departments or certain aspects of business where there really isn't a need for nearly as much learning and creativity and innovation, which is really what psychological safety fosters and facilitates within a work environment.
Help us here, please, and the audience who will be watching or listening to this podcast. How can this be of value for an autocratic organization when the organization is more into the hierarchical approach into performing? Yeah, there is this belief at the level of the management and leaders that we want to have fault-free organization. Just it's well-oiled machinery. We don't want to experiment things. We have zero tolerance to experimenting and having some errors. So where is the added value of psychological safety? How can psychological safety be convincing to autocratic leaders?
That's a really, really good question. What it points to is a story I heard about. There was an individual that was working in auto manufacturing in Japan. And Japan, of course, is famous for their the Kaizen approach to auto manufacturing, wherein they really emphasize increasing every aspect of the supply chain and the whole system by 1%. The idea is you make all these small little incremental changes every step along the way, and you get a better result at the end. Because all of those 1% changes will compound into much bigger outcomes. And so there was this individual that was steeped in the Japanese methodology and was then subsequently brought to North America. And there was an American auto manufacturer who said, okay, we want to do things the way they've done them in Japan. And so one of the very first things they do is they install these pull cables on the shop floor, right? Where everybody on the shop floor now can pull on this handle, stop the production line. And what happened is they installed these lines and nobody pulled the cable. And so the executives thought, geez, what's going on here? Because we know there are opportunities to improve the process here, and yet nobody's pulling the cable. And so culturally, it was driven into their minds that you do not stop the production line. That was the motto in North America. Do not stop the production line, because every time it stops, that's X number of cars that are not being manufactured, and therefore we're losing money. And so it was driven into them. And so eventually what they had to do was physically, like when they observed the shop floor and they saw some error happening, they had to physically hold the person's hand, put it on the pulley, and then pull the damn thing to stop the production line, to be able to fix the tool and then be able to turn it back on. And so there was such an aversion to it. And okay, so what's the root for this whole story? And I think the thing that I'd like you to take away from it is that I think it's the frontline person, the person that's sort of at the lowest level of the organization, that can have a pretty significant impact if they had the voice to be able to say, I wish I could do it a little bit better here, or I wish I could do things slightly differently. And being able to empower those folks really helps bring those solutions from the bottom all the way up to the top of the organization. And I think it's that idea of all these small little changes can make massive improvements over the long haul. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, how do you think an autocratic leader might perceive that story and perceive this kind of mentality? Feel free to shoot it down. I'd love to hear, how you might approach
that. What came first in my mind? Traumas. Sometimes, because when business is okay, when things are moving nicely, we don't feel the need, then we don't ask for any help. We just see it great. Yeah. But when the need is there, then we might ask for help and the readiness will be, let's explore other ways of doing it. And by the way, from where to start? So if you come now to an organization, just you want like to give them a consultation on enhancing psychological safety within their organization, what would be the steps from where to start and how to move forward with it?
Yeah, that's a fairly simple one. It's you start by measuring psychological safety. And for an organization that's larger, I think of, we're all familiar with the concept of culture and why it's important. And there's lots of many articles and thoughts around why culture is even maybe more important than strategy, or the phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Not sure if you're familiar with that, but that the way I relate psychological safety to culture is like a weather system. It's this big amorphous thing. So if you can imagine a map of a country, there's weather patterns that are different in different areas, right? The temperatures up in the mountains are different than the temperatures down on the coast, which are different from, temperatures in inland. So when you measure psychological safety, if you could imagine your organization as a map and you have all the different departments, you have manufacturing and finance and marketing and et cetera, the temperature in each one of those departments is going to be different. And even the temperature within a team, within a department might be different. And maybe necessarily so, right? The temperature in your finance or legal department might be one where, we don't tolerate a whole lot of risk here because we don't need to innovate. In fact, we need to do the opposite of innovate. We need to be super, super conservative. Whereas in your new product development team, yeah, let's have a lot of innovation. We need to be able to innovate in that area, obviously. And so you want to look at the map. You want to be able to look at the pockets of psychological safety and where they're at to be able to first assess, okay, where can we influence and where should we influence psychological safety first and foremost? Where is psychological safety low and where do we need psychological safety to be the highest?
Nice. From what I'm hearing, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You do have to measure what the level of psychological safety that you have now. Of course, the number one question, and I know Amy Edmondson answers that in one of her TED Talks, is about accountability. So where do you draw the line between psychological safety and making people feel comfortable and it's okay to make mistakes, to fail, and accountability and performance? And I would love to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think often people think a psychologically safe environment is one where we're all singing, holding hands and singing songs and it's all kumbaya, right?
Kumbaya,
well, that's a misconception. I think what we notice is areas of low psychological safety are usually areas where there's a lot of politeness, there's a lot of agreeing, there's a lot of yes, people just towing the line, following without really any form of pushback. And that's not what we're aiming for. We're not aiming for people to be compliant. We're aiming for there to be rigor in the work that's being done and for outcomes to be at the forefront of our discussion. So as a group, as a team, we want to have psychological safety, not just so that we can hear one another, but so that we can solve problems and move forward much more rapidly than we could if we weren't speaking up. So every time you notice some sort of error, or maybe you even made a mistake, you want to bring that to the forefront right away, because that's an opportunity to learn and it's an opportunity to do things differently and improve the process. And that requires rigor, that requires people to be bought in and accountable to what it is that we as an organization are trying to achieve. It's not about just singing, holding hands and singing songs.
So do we have levels of psychological safety? Do we know that this organization or this team has low psychological safety, medium, mid-high, or this is a perfect? Do we have different measurements or the criteria to measure different levels of psychological safety within a team or within an organization?
Yeah, absolutely, we do. The tool we use is developed by Amy Emerson. It's a 7-question assessment. So that's one thing that makes it really attractive, is that it's not going to overwhelm your staff. If you're administering an assessment across your entire organization or an entire department, let's say, it's not overwhelming. It takes 3 minutes and you get the results. And what you can do is you can generate those results and look at them on a team-by-team basis, or you can look across a department, or you can look across an entire organization. And you, with every individual, they're reporting their sense or their belief about how, to what degree they feel psychologically safe. And so naturally, you're going to have some people at the low end and some people at the high end, even within a single team. And with that, we can then generate the average. So we can look at the average by the organization, by the department, by the team. And when we demonstrate the report and the results to a team, for example, we would look at not just the average score, but we look at the variability. So that's what we show to the team. We say, look, your average score is 75 out of 100, which puts you in the second percentile. You're somewhere between the 50th and the 75th percentile. And there's a high degree of variability. So some people feel like there's a really high level of psychological safety and some feel like there's a low. So let's talk about that. What's going on? And so, yes, it can be measured. And we also, when looking at the report, break down psychological safety into 4 different subdimensions, which can be really helpful, because psychological safety definitely feels like this sort of amorphous thing. And so we look at, number one is the willingness to help. So to what degree are people willing to help one another? We look at diversity and inclusion. So to what extent do people feel included and feel like their differences are appreciated in the team? The third is around tolerance for risk and failure. So how much do we feel like we can take risks in this team? And then the last is about open conversation, which I regard to be likely the most important, because not only do you want to consider to what degree people feel like they can have open dialogue and discussion, is I see that as a real channel for achieving outcomes. So, for example, one of the teams that we've been working with, their psychological safety score did not improve that much over those first 3 dimensions at all in the first 3 to 6 months, but the bottom one did. So the openness to conversation moved up. And I thought, okay, that's a victory, because if people now are feeling like they can speak up, we're gonna improve those other 3 dimensions of psychological safety with time.
It's funny.
Interesting.
You just remind me before you asked the question, Osama. Just yesterday, I gave a sheet, a self-assessment sheet. Just the person rates themselves from 1 to 5, and as I was walking around, I noticed one person just 5s, gave himself 5s across the board, and I smiled and I had to scratch my head, and I just had to stop and say, listen. This is a self-assessment. You're the only one who's going to see the results. I'm not going to take those sheets from you, and I'm not going to, it's not something for me to keep. So I saw on the side of my eye, I saw that person opening that assessment again and rescoring himself. So it just gave me an indication about that psychological safety in that organization and so forth. So. Amazing.
Which brings me to the point. So priming people and setting the stage for asking folks their perception of psychological safety is really important, right? Because if you're like, you are going to answer this survey, and you are going to answer it in the right way. Obviously everyone's like,
yeah. And you're gonna tell me that. And it's funny that leaders also at the same time they tell me, I always tell my people it's okay to tell me their mistakes. I was like, but they don't come with any mistakes. I was like,
yeah. Well, that precisely points to a large emphasis of the training that we do within organizations. So, mind if I share a little bit there? So what we're focusing on?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what we focus on in our training is helping managers and leaders improve their interpersonal skills. So what we recognize so often, especially with leaders that are at the top of organizations, is they tend to have a very direct approach with their communication, right? They're very forward, direct, kind of power focused communicators, and that's what gets them ahead. I think it's very effective in especially in senior management circles. And what we focus on is what's the impact that those communication styles have on the folks around you, right? So it's not enough to just say, my door's open, come on in anytime, right? Like that still feels potentially threatening or scary for the people around you. And so we want managers and leaders to be particularly mindful to not just the words, but the way they communicate those words, the tone, the nonverbals, and those are all skills that can be improved and practiced over time. Because if you watch professional sports now, every time the players go to the sidelines, they're asking for an iPad and they're watching the play that just occurred, because they're thinking, gosh, what did I do wrong? How did I make a mistake there? Or how could I have done things better? And so that's kind of the degree of accountability we're looking for in leaders and managers, is to be like that, looking, going, oh, okay, I just had that meeting. What did I do wrong? Maybe recording it, being able to look back, get coaching on key moments within a meeting, so that they can collect some feedback, because we're often oblivious to how we impact the people around us. And that's the level, that's the part we're really trying to get managers and leaders to level up on.
Nice.
Stephan, you're now causing me some troubles with this. I'm coaching a few executives on executive communication and assertiveness, and how, and now I just could imagine how it's going to differ now when the whole executive communication style is gonna differ. So they can allow, and have that space for others to speak up. And but by the way, what's the future of psychological safety? What's next? Where are we going with this topic?
Really good question. I'm going to steal the metaphor from Amy Edmondson. She says psychological safety is it's the soil, not the seed. So what does she mean by that? I think what she means by that is that if you think about a farmer, what are you trying to do? You're trying to plant plants and then harvest in the fall and collect the fruit. And as a business, that's what we want. We want to do a bunch of work and then reap the harvest from our hard work. And what's so important is that you need to have rich soil. So without rich soil, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how much water you put on your plants. It doesn't matter how much sun you give them. If you think about those as kind of rewards for your people and your staff, what you want is that rich soil. And so I see psychological safety as so foundational. I don't see it going anywhere, right? Like, it's not like a trend that's going to go away in 6 months or 12 months. I see this as absolutely instrumental for organizations to be thinking about, because without that rich, healthy soil, you're not going to reap the rewards. And, I connect our work to ultimately solving the world's biggest problems. Humanity's facing all sorts of challenges every day. There's new ones that seem to be emerging. And so we as a human race, we need to be able to solve those problems as efficiently as possible in order for us to maintain our quality of life here on planet Earth. So I don't see psychological safety going anywhere. I'd love to hear what you two think. Am I way off base, or do you happen to agree?
This is very powerful. You see, it's like when organizations have high level of disengagement, but then they push more of incentives and yeah, let's go to team building, but all they do is just they replace the handcuffs made of steel with the handcuffs made of gold. Yeah. But by then the team is disengaged even from the team building activities that aim to enhance the engagement. Yeah. So yeah, I relate a lot to this, Stephan. Anything for you, Zahi, to add before we conclude
Yeah, I would.
the episode?
I think there are more studies gonna come up on psychological safety. More books. I think. I want to say it's a new topic, but not really. I think some leaders will struggle with it. I think that's key. I think awareness is key. But I think also that we have to there has to be a little bit of hand holding. We have to hold leaders' hands a little bit, step by step, to encourage them to let go a little bit. Look at the human side of operating a team, or running a team, or operating a business. It's not always black and white. It's not always about money. And hopefully that's where we can increase psychological safety in organizations. People hear it, but I think leaders need a little bit of reality check. A lot of times they need a reality check. I remember a studies a while ago I heard about from McKinsey, saying that we overestimate as leaders, we overestimate the level of trust within our team. Like trust maybe at I would say 70%, but the reality is 40 something, between me and my team. And I think leaders need to be realistic about the level of trust that they have, or not trust, psychological safety, because a little bit difference there. And but I think with the more research, more studies, people will have buy-in, and leaders will hopefully that's a brighter future, I would say.
So. Yeah. Oh, there's so much richness there I'd love to add on. So if I could take just a couple more minutes. So the first is around well, you mentioned studies, and we're conducting a study right now. So we're just in the data collection phase, and where I mentioned those interpersonal skills. So what we've done is we've developed an assessment where it's a performance-based assessment. We've created videos and clips of challenging moments in a team, and then we have leaders respond, recording their response using their webcam. And then we codify those responses to see which of the leaders are demonstrating high levels of interpersonal skills. We're calling them management facilitative interpersonal skills. And so we assess those skills, and now we're correlating those with psychological safety, with the hypothesis that managers with the highest level of psychological safety are going to be the ones that have the highest level of interpersonal skills as well. So those two things are going to correlate. And then once we can establish correlation, assuming that we get a positive correlation, and who knows? I mean, that's why we're doing the study, right? Then ideally we can improve those interpersonal skills in order to improve psychological safety. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, given that we're on opposite sides of the world, I would feel remiss if we didn't mention cultures, like not just within an organization, we did talk about that, but cultures within nations or regions of the world. And I think an important consideration, especially like we're seeing it so much now with teams that were able to go remote, right? With COVID, that was an opportunity. And I think it created a lot more international teams with members from a variety of different areas of the world. And so obviously there's some like time zone issues, but then there's also cultural issues and psychological safety. I mentioned diversity and inclusion as part of psychological safety. I think those two things are mutually, they're part of the same. It's like two sides of the same coin. I don't think you can have psychological safety if you don't have some form of culture humility by the leader and managers of a team or an organization. I think those leaders need to be sensitive to the different cultures and at least be open to trying to understand different cultures, and knowing that the culture within which you're raised makes a difference to your perception of psychological safety and your willingness to speak up. I think that's absolutely true. So I could see in some regions of the world where you are raised to speak up. You're raised to put your hand up, starting when you're just a tiny little child. Whereas in other cultures, there's much more of an obedience, type of culture where you're not necessarily encouraged to speak up. And especially, for example, there's cultures where you really respect elders. And so when older people, more senior people speak up, well, you defer to them. And I'm not saying one culture is better than the other. I'm just saying you need to be cognizant of those cultural differences, and how each individual is socialized within your team is going to affect how they show up and how they perceive psychological safety. So you need to be aware of all of that. So
Thank you.
what do you gentlemen think on the topic of culture?
Wise. Very, very wise. Thank you. And it's great that you opened this topic, as within this region, we relate a lot to what you've just mentioned. Yeah. And there is nothing right, nothing wrong here, but it's more about who might be faster in going there so great that you have brought in this wisdom to that dimension of the culture and its impact. Stephan, it's really nice. It's really insightful. Yeah, we've covered many aspects, and we know still a lot more to be covered in this topic. However, we respect your time and time of the audience. We're more or less committed to 45 minutes, so we really appreciate it. And what's your last warning here about you now before we say bye-bye? What's this one thing in you, like the key success competency within you that helped you and still to help you to continue this journey?
Well, I think at my core, I've always been an entrepreneur. I've always been someone who likes to create new things and start brand new things that previously didn't exist. And so while I need to be mindful of building a business, I'm also I like to stay fairly close to the product and product development and innovation. And so what's occupying a lot of our time and energy these days is around artificial intelligence and seeing what's coming out now. The Chat GPT is really changing. It's causing a lot of conversation around the world, that's for sure. And so we're looking at how can we use AI to improve humans, to make humans better, communicators. That's ultimately where we're going with AI. We don't want to replace humans. By no means do we want, and sure, there's going to be AI that's going to be replacing some human jobs, but I think it's just going to create new ones. And so we're really focused on that, making humans better communicators through the use of technology.
Nice. Thank you
I
so
just wonder how would a robot that doesn't feel psychologically safe react?
Here's the thing. We had about over a year ago, we had a guest specifically about AI and technology and stuff. And I think with the ChatGPT and what's happening now, I think the conversation probably will take a different shape. Last note, I want to thank you for taking the time. I know it's early in the morning over there. Much appreciated. If anybody in our audience would like to reach out to you and ask you questions or connect with you, how can they do that?
I'd love for people to connect with me on LinkedIn. So just search my name on LinkedIn and you'll find me. I don't think there's too many Stephan Wiedners out there. And secondly, and I'm assuming you'll put a link in the show notes for those who want to click through. And then also, one of the things that I like to offer guests and folks that are listening to the podcast that I've been on, because I've been on a few now, is to start by measuring psychological safety. So I'd love for you to reach out to me. And if you're a member of a team or even a team leader, team manager, I will happily measure the psychological safety of your team. We'll administer that assessment for you, get the results, and briefly debrief those results with your team. So that's my gift to you as a listener. You can find that on zarango.com. So zarango.com/free PSI. PSI stands for Psychological Safety Index. So free PSI.
Thank you so much.
Kind of you. Thank you, Stephan.
It was a pleasure. And
it was a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you both for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you for listening to Lead to Succeed podcast. If you like this podcast, please remember to give us 5-star rating, share it with your family and friends, and follow us on social media. We also welcome you to send us your ideas, suggestions, and any question. Our contact details will be found on the podcast description. This is Osama and Zahi, and until next time, make sure to remain authentic, keep learning, and to enjoy life.